Oh my gosh, I'm not sure if you ever played the game, but I found it to be so frustrating. I never owned it, so I wasn't able to master the combination moves that allow you to really beat your opponent. And my friend was a master at that, and to just get beat down every single time, it was scarring, I should say. Anyways, my name's Jonathan Hadel, and I make music as Pink Buddha. And today we're going to do a Streetfighter style matchup between the Akai Force and the new Akai MPC One. They're going to go head to head on a number of different features, 12 rounds, and we're going to see who comes out ahead. Oh, and I'm putting the timestamp links in the description if you want to jump around. Before we jump in, I should maybe make a disclaimer in the fact that I own the Force and I'm borrowing this from a friend. And how I'm going to score the face-off between these two things is entirely my opinion. And you might totally disagree with that. Feel free to do so in the comments. But I'm the ringmaster here, so I'm going to control how the points are allotted to each player. And quick plug here, if you're interested in some more information about the Force, I have a series called Force Fridays. You can click up here to see more of those. Okay, so let's jump right in. Round one, we're going to compare hardware differences between the two. At the risk of stating the obvious, the Akai Force has a lot more inputs and outputs than the MPC One. The inputs on the Akai Force are XLR and phantom powered, plus individual volume controls per channel. The MPC One only has one dial for both channels and only a pair of stereo outs, as opposed to the Akai Force, which has two sets of stereo outs. So I hate to say it, but the results at the end of round one, Akai Force gives a decisive blow to the MPC One. Okay, round two, we're going to be looking at the differences in the pads. Obviously, they're quite different. The MPC One's got these classic MPC pads that are nice and big and fat. And the Force has tons of pads, but they're much smaller. And I have to say, this is a really tough face-off because the MPC One pads are much thicker. They give you kind of the perfect amount of space to be able to hit notes. They're a little bit smaller than like on the MPC Live and the MPC X. So there's some compactness to this that's a little bit more similar to the Force. What I really like is the fact that there's a good amount of space between the pads that are there so that you don't accidentally trigger the other ones. Whereas on the Force, I do find myself accidentally hitting the wrong pads because of how tightly packed in here they are. There's not a lot of space between these pads. Now this is a really tough one to call because they are so different. The MPC One, these pads are so much more playable, but there's only 16 of them, where you have 64 pads here. Is that right? Yeah, 64 pads here. And they're a little harder to play, but you have so many more to choose from. Right now, the samples are only located here, but if you wanted to, I could copy and spread out these to other areas. You could add samples in, so this entire area could be playable. So in our Streetfighter style matchup, I'm gonna have to say that both players scored a point. Okay, round three, we're gonna look at pad colors. Now, from first glance, there's an obvious difference in that the MPC One has their color around the outside with the black top, and with the Force, the whole pad is lit up. For me, I'm kind of one way or another. I do like the fact that the pad colors are much more prominent in the Force, but it's kind of a moot point for me. Where I'm gonna have to give the MPC One a slight edge is when it comes down to changing these colors. On the Force, it's a lot less intuitive. You have to go to the track, double click on that, and then there's a question here where the pads follow the track color. If I click on that, you can see how it changes it, or I just kind of wrecked them. But you can go to pad colors here and then go through and individually change some of these pads. Well, there we go. That worked better. If I wanted to change any of these colors, I could simply select one of them, and now I change that to pink. The MPC One generously puts this right in one of their menu items. It says pad color right there. I don't have to dig for it in a lower item. I can simply go to pad color, and there's my option. So at the end of that round, I'm going to give the MPC One a small hit. Wasn't a knockout punch, but the MPC One definitely scores a point in that round. All right, round 4, we're going to look at the controller knobs. Both the Akai Force and the MPC One have this turn dial that is used to control some of the numbers. These are almost identical. I think they probably use the same exact ones. The real difference between the two comes in these controlled custom knobs here. On the Force, you can push this knob button and choose between a lot of different presets for these knobs, between adjusting the volume of individual tracks or different sends, or from the project you can have some master knobs that are set up, or for this particular track or the screen that you're on. With the MPC One, you have these cue links over here that you can also program to be assigned to different things based upon the page that you're on or for the overall project. Okay, in this round, I'm going to have to give this one decisively to the Force for a couple reasons. One, that there's 8 knobs as opposed to 4, so you have so much more control. Secondly, you have a screen above each knob telling you what that knob is, so that you don't have to necessarily remember. On the MPC One, the only way to find out what these knobs are is if you push and hold the cue link to bring up the particular settings. There's no side menu to show you what these knobs are actually controlling, and you have 4 different banks for the cue links. So when I was using the MPC Live, and it's very similar to that, I can't tell you how many times that I would press the cue link, look at the knobs, remind myself, okay, track, let go, start to play, and I've totally forgotten again. In contrast, on the Force, you just have it listed here. So I got to say, this round goes to the Akai Force. Big combination move to the MPC One. Okay, round 5, controlling clips. There's a huge difference in the way that the Akai Force and the MPC One go about songwriting and arranging your pieces. On the Akai Force, you can control and arrange your clips by going to the launch page. You could also control them by touching on the screen up here. So in case you wanted to be on the notes and still trigger clips, you could do so from above. And you could play them from down here. Also, by holding the note and the launch key down at the same time, it now splits these pads so that the top half here allows you to trigger the clips that are up there. You can see how those move around and they mimic each other. And then down below here is where you can play the pads. Right now, they're focused on these 16 here, but if you had other pads that you had assigned to this section, you could do that here as well. Or if you have an instrument on here, it's now spread out between these lower 32 pads. On the MPC One, you're going to need to decide how you want these pads to function. There's no split control here. You can either go to the overall view where you play the pads, or if you go to the menu, you can go to track, and now these pads will control the different tracks. I only have one track in here, so you can't see how that looks. But if you were going to turn them on and off, you could do so by these pads. So yeah, I'm changing that. So for this round, I definitely feel like the Force scored the most points. There's just so many more pads to work with. The split screen is amazing that you can play and control the clips at the same time. You can also control them on this screen up here. So it really gives you so many different ways to trigger them and to play this instrument at the same time. The MPC One is a lot more limited in this, because you have to use the menu to jump between whether or not you're going to be playing these pads or using them to trigger the tracks. So Akai Force, once again, big punch to the MPC One. All right, we got the Akai Force taking a quick lead over the MPC One in our Streetfighter matchup, but it's not over yet. All right, round number 6. Let's look at note repeat. This one is a pretty close call between the two. Let's look at the Force first. The note repeat on the Force is this ARP button because you can choose between arpeggiator or note repeat depending on if you're playing an instrument or if you're doing the drums. That has to be configured by pushing Shift, the ARP button, and then you control whether or not you want to select that this is going to be note repeat or a pattern or playing the arpeggiator. I'm going to put it on note repeat right now, and then you got to choose the time division here. So there's a fair amount of control when you're doing this if you want it to be swing or to latch the notes when you play them. You can push and hold the button if you want it to be momentary. So as soon as you let up your hand, it's going to stop, or you can push it so that it's lit up and then it's going to stay on. Okay, let's look at the MPC One. Note repeat button's right down here. A similar way, if you hold it down, it's going to trigger the note repeat. To get it to stay on is a little clunkier. You either have to double tap it or press the Shift button and then the note repeat. That's a little clunkier. I don't like how that works. However, the MPC One has a distinct advantage in one way, in that you can hold the note repeat down and quickly choose between the time allotment. So if it's 16th notes, it's nice and quick to be able to change between them. On the Force, you have to push Shift and the ARP button, and then you have to come up to the time division, click on that, and use this rotator knob, which is way too slow if you're actually trying to use this in more of a performance manner or for recording. So this one's a really tough one to call if you're putting them head to head, because the Akai Force has more options with the note repeat, and that you can use it as an arpeggiator if you're playing an instrument. And it has some further functions and settings that you can do on there, like use the sustain pedal to latch it. That's a really nice feature. But it is way more clunky when you're trying to switch between different time divisions. You pretty much have to decide what your time division is going to be and then set it and leave it there. For the MPC One, you hold down the note repeat and then you can change the time division for your note repeat. And that's just so much easier to get to. Now, I was leaning towards giving the MPC One the advantage in this round. However, as I started to play around with this note repeat, being able to switch between the time divisions isn't as practical as I first thought it was going to be. And here's the reason why. It's not that easy to do on the fly on the MPC One. It is faster to get to in the sense that it's right there and you can push a button, and the Akai Force takes a few more steps to be able to get in there, click on the no repeat, and be able to change some of these settings. So I don't feel like there's a quick way to change the time division for either one of these on the fly. And for that reason, I'm going to give a slight edge to the Force because of the fact that it has more options to it. Another hit to MPC One. Okay, round 7. We're going to talk about the differences in how the banks work, which is the sound banks here. Let's talk about the MPC One first. You have your set of 16 pads here. And then you can click between these 4 buttons here to go between A, B, C, D. And you could have a different set of samples on each one of those. To get to E, F, G, and H, you have to push the Shift button down to switch between those. So at your fingertips, you have a total of, what is that, 8 times 16? I don't know. I can't do math that fast in this time in the morning. Definitely have to give the MPC One some props here on how easy it is to change between these different banks. You simply push them and you can pop back and forth really easy. It's very performance oriented. Now let's compare this to the Force. Right off the bat, you don't have any bank buttons. To switch between the banks, you have to push the Shift key and then the octave buttons here, where you can go between drum banks B through E, C through F, and D through G. And this isn't nearly as smooth and easy as it is changing between the banks on the MPC One. However, in some ways on the Force, you have 4 banks already in front of you. All of these pads could have drum samples on them. So it's like you have banks A, B, C, D right here on your screen. Then if you push the shift button, you have 4 more. You can push the shift button again, you have 4 more, and you can push the shift button again and have 4 more. So now we're talking about 64 times 4, which is, yeah, it's still too early in the morning to be doing math. And honestly, I don't know why you would ever need 256 different samples in one track. So even though that's an excessive amount, I'm going to give the win to the Force just because you have 64 available on this front page versus only 16 over here. And sure, it's fine to be able to switch between those different views, but the Force just gives you more pads to play with. Okay, round 8, we're going to look at the differences between the two and how you can arrange an entire song. And mostly how I arrange my songs on the Force is that I divide these rows up into a particular phrase, something like a verse or a chorus or an intro, and then I use the launch button to move my way between them. Like you would have the intro, you play the first verse, then go to the chorus, maybe go to a bridge, come back to the chorus, or whatever arrangement that you want. And while this method on the Force is very flexible and playable, there is a distinct disadvantage to it in that you can't automate the movement between these different rows. You have to manually sit here and push it, which does give you the opportunity to be more spontaneous and to change up your mind, but it doesn't just automatically move through these different rows in some sort of sequence. You do have the ability to control whether or not you want the clip to continue looping or just to play once. You need to be on the clip view and you can select or deselect this loop button. But besides that, the manner in which it jumps between different clips or different rows is completely manual. Now on the MPC One, there are some differences in how this works. I'm not really an MPC user and I'm not that familiar with the MPC workflow, so there may be other ways that you can do this, so please forgive that. But if you go to menu, there is a song mode that once you get to there, you can arrange a sequence that you want your song to flow and basically complete an entire piece on here that will perform itself in the exact order and sequence that you want it to. Supposedly, the Force is going to be coming out with a song mode that remembers what you do with all these different clip triggers and saves that into a longer song format, but it currently doesn't exist. So I'm going to definitely give the win in this regard to the MPC One if you want to create more finished pieces on this instrument. So the MPC One finally delivers a decisive blow. Okay, round 9, we're going to talk about MIDI control. On the Force, the way to control MIDI is you have to create a separate MIDI track. And now I've set up so track number 7 is a MIDI track, and these notes are going to be assigned to an external MIDI instrument or whatever I'm choosing to play. Right off the bat, I'm going to admit that the Force has some serious limitations in this regard. Number 1 is that the MIDI only is sent out in this melodic note view. So if you want to use the Force to send out MIDI notes for drums, this is a really clunky way of doing so. You can't change the color of these individual pads when you're on melodic view, so you can't use it in the same way that you do when you're on a drum track and the different drum pads or different drum sounds can have different colors. The other real disadvantage when you're using the Force to control external MIDI is there's no way to change this pad arrangement so that this note, let's say, controls a specific MIDI note. This is a keyboard view, so whatever this note is on the keyboard, whether that be, I think that's going to be a C here in the way that I've arranged it, that's going to play a C going out externally. You can change the octave if you want to press Shift and then switch between different octaves, but the distance between these notes is set. Now let's look at the MPC One. You get to MIDI by pressing the menu button and then MIDI control. And one of the great things about how the MPC One controls external MIDI is that each one of these pads can be assigned to a different MIDI channel or to a different MIDI note, giving you a tremendous amount of flexibility to play external instruments through MIDI and have that arranged on this pad. I mean, God, how great would it be just to have it sending a few notes out here that might go to drums, and maybe these pads up above trigger something else. Additionally, the XY pad can also be set to control external MIDI, which is fantastic. On the Force, you have an XY pad as well, but it only is configured to control internal effects. So you can change which internal ones that you want to go between. They have some presets in there and you can control them yourself. But to be able to go in and have this XY pad send out MIDI signals is amazing. The third way that the MPC One kicks the Force's butt with regard to MIDI is this MIDI learn feature that you can hit notes, assign them, and talk back and forth and build your MIDI configuration a lot easier, and that's not possible in the Force. So for this round, definitely giving the MPC One a win. I wish that Akai, could you listen to your MPC One team and try to incorporate some of the stuff into the Force, because that would be awesome. Okay, round 10 is the XY pad. We sort of already talked about that before, so you might be able to guess who's going to win this round. They're both pretty similar, except for the fact that I just pointed out in the last round that you can use this XY pad to control external MIDI, whereas the Force, it only does internal effects. The other way that the MPC One really stands out with regard to the XY pad is how easy it is to get to it. So if you happen to be on song mode or you're programming in your beats, there's a quick key to the XY pad right here that you can jump to it and then jump back to your other one. On the Force, if you want to get to the XY pad, you have to go to menu and then come over here and select the XY pad. So it's not quite as easy to jump back and forth between the XY pad. You have another button to push to get there, which is a small deal, but I really like the fact that it's just listed on the side here, so you can just pop into it. It's just a really easy way to pop back and forth between some of these different sections. Where in the Force, you have to push this menu button. So I'm going to assign the win for this round to the MPC One. All right, round 11, we're going to talk about the sampler. You would think that they would be almost the same, being that they're both an MPC product, but there's some distinct differences. Let's go to the Akai Force. The sampler is pretty basic. You can adjust the level, and when you arm it and you record into the sampler, so when you hit record and you sample something in, it's going to save it, and then you can edit it in more of a classic MPC style. On the MPC One, when you go to the sampler, there's a real big difference here. You can see down below that there are already some different options. On the Force, when you choose ARM and you start to record, the slice button does pop up that allows you to be able to manually put in some of those slices. The MPC One has the same thing, but it takes it even a step further, that when you're recording, that you can tap the pads immediately where you want it to go. So it like quickly assigns what you're sampling to different pads, which is particularly helpful if you want these different splices to not move in a sequential manner. You want to just grab a quick sample and pop that on this pad over here and then come back into your sequence. You can do that right on the fly. On the Akai Force, once you sample something in and you're hitting that splice button, it assigns it to the pads in a sequential manner, and you can't alter that. You can go in and start to edit your pads and assign different samples or pieces to different notes, but it's a lot more manual and clunky to do so. The MPC One, to be able to just click on the pad you want as it's sampling to assign where those slices go. Again, I don't know why, when they're essentially the same software, that there's such a distinctive difference between the two. I mean, I do understand that the MPC sampling method has kind of been established already, but Kai, it's your same goddamn company. You can can't you borrow those things for the Force? So for that round, decisive victory to the MPC One. You'd think they would be pretty similar, but definitely the MPC One has some distinct advantages. All right, we're on the last round, round 12, and it's going to be all about workflow. All right, let's start with talking about the MPC One. To get to tracks, you have to go to track view, and this is where you can add your audio tracks or your different MIDI tracks or different kits that are going to be on here. Personally, I do find this to be not very intuitive in the way it works, but I'm not an MPC user, so I'll give you that caveat. The other thing that I find to be really weird is when you go to menu and then you go to track mute, that it doesn't bring up the audio tracks on here. It's just the MIDI tracks that you're controlling, which seems a little bit absurd to me. Maybe there's a different way of getting to it, but I don't know how to get to it. Now in the Force, things are a lot more visual. You have each row equals a track, and so when you're on the launch view or you're dealing with the matrix view up above, you're able to see the clips and that go along with each track. If you are grouping clips to go together in the same row, it's very easy to see that visually. And to navigate your way around here, you simply can add or delete tracks by holding the delete button, which is really nice. It's very fast to be able to eliminate those. I do wish you could move the tracks around. That is something that is currently static on the Force. But I'm such a visual person, and coming from an Ableton background, this is exactly the way that Ableton is organized. So it fits perfectly in my mind to think about different tracks this way, different rows for ideas this way. I love it. On the MPC One, there's so much deep diving with regard to these menus and the tracks and the rest. I tried using the MPC Live for a while. I just couldn't wrap my brain around it. So sorry, Force wins a decisive victory on this round. Oh, and I guess if I was going to throw in another round, it would be to look at the way you can mix on these two instruments. On the Force, if you go to Mixer, it's very easy to see all the different levels, even the knobs. If you want to go to volumes, you can come in here and use the knobs to turn these up and down. You can also use the screen, but it gives you a really nice view to see all of them at once. With the MPC One, you can only really look at a mixer for each track individually. I could go through and click on them. I don't have more tracks here, but if I did, they would come up and I could adjust the levels, and you can see them on the screen. So you would be able to see them in a certain way, but on the Force, it functions just more like a regular DAW and how you're used to seeing a mixer where the levels are going up and down, not side to side. Plus the Force just assigns a lot more of the screen to the mixing functions, whether that be for panning, for doing the different sends or inserts and outs. On the MPC One, you have to do those individually, which is not that big of a deal, but God, it's really nice to have them all laid out here in front of you like this. So if we were going to add another round on here, I would have to give the victory again to the Force, delivering a decisive blow to the MPC One. All right, so let's take a look at the final results. We got the Force winning on rounds 1 and 2 regarding hardware and pads. MPC One takes the pad colors. Force takes the knobs, the clips, no repeat, and the sound banks. Then the MPC One comes back with song mode, MIDI, the XY pad, the sampler, but Force comes back around to take the workflow and the extra round of mixing. And so the overall results are the Force winning 8 rounds and the MPC One winning 5. Now, it may not have come as a surprise to you that I gave the winner of this Streetfighter matchup to the Akai Force, being that I told you that I own the Force and not the MPC One. But in this head-to-head matchup, I do think it's important to acknowledge a couple other caveats. One of those is that the MPC One is just so much smaller and compact. So if the footprint of the Force and the size of it is kind of unwieldy, then the MPC One definitely has an advantage there. And you can't ignore the fact that the MPC One just costs less money. Although you can get a used Force for about $800 and a new MPC One for $700, so there's only a $100 difference there. But if you're looking at the retail price, the MPC One is a good third cheaper, so that's something to consider. Approximately a third. Let's not do too much math here. And even though I kind of beat up on the MPC One in this video, I have to say that I really do like it. I love how playable these pads are. I like the compact size. So it's still really a great instrument. I just prefer the Force. Now, if you found this video to be helpful or maybe just entertaining, consider hitting the like button. And I would love to get at it in the comments, hear the things that you agree with or that you disagree with. Let's get in some arguments about this and discuss the difference between these two instruments. And I want to know, who would you make the winner in this Street Fighter matchup?